Hey there, movie fans, and welcome back to Fade to Fact. Today we're diving into a film that feels like it was plucked straight from a fever dream of fairy tales and nightmares, Ridley Scott's Legend, 1985. Before Gladiator and before The Martian, Scott wanted to craft a dark fantasy unlike anything audiences had seen before. With Tom Cruise as the innocent hero Jack, Mia Sara as Princess Lily, and Tim Curry as the unforgettable Lord of Darkness, Legend set out to redefine what fantasy cinema could look like in the 1980s. The movie is remembered for its surreal visuals, eerie atmosphere, and of course, Curry's jaw-dropping transformation into one of cinema's greatest villains. But as magical as the final film appears, the journey to bring it to the screen was anything but smooth. From destroyed sets to brutal makeup sessions, questionable studio decisions, and even two very different soundtracks, Legend had one of the rockiest productions of the decade. So grab your unicorn horn and step carefully into the swamp, because we're about to reveal 20 things you never knew about Legend. 1. Ridley Scott's obsession with fairy tales. After the massive success of Alien and Blade Runner, Ridley Scott wasn't content to be labeled only as a science fiction director. He had long been fascinated by classic fairy tales, especially the darker, more twisted versions passed down by the Brothers Grimm. These weren't the sanitized bedtime stories kids knew, but tales filled with danger, temptation, and moral ambiguity. Scott imagined a film that merged this unsettling fairy tale spirit with the breathtaking scale of a Hollywood production. That idea became Legend, a movie that walked the tightrope between beauty and horror in a way few films dared to attempt at the time. 2. Tom Cruise was still unknown. When Tom Cruise was cast as Jack, he wasn't yet the megastar who would dominate the late 80s and 90s. At the time, his most notable role had been in Risky Business, and filming on Legend began before Top Gun catapulted him to global fame. Determined to prove himself, Cruise threw his energy into the demanding role, often performing his own stunts, climbing, and sword fighting without hesitation. Ridley Scott later said Cruise's wide-eyed sincerity and athleticism made him the perfect embodiment of Jack's innocence. For Cruise, the film became an important stepping stone toward superstardom. 3. Mia Sara beat hundreds of actresses for the role. Mia Sara was only 16 when she auditioned for Princess Lily, and she had virtually no professional acting background. Ridley Scott and his casting team saw hundreds of actresses, some already well-known, but Sara's combination of innocence, natural elegance, and emotional intensity made her stand out immediately. Despite her youth, she handled the pressure of working alongside industry veterans with surprising confidence. Her luminous presence on screen became a vital counterbalance to the film's darker imagery. Sara herself has said she had no idea at the time how big the project would be, making her performance even more remarkable. 4. Tim Curry's makeup took over 5 hours daily. Curry's transformation into the Lord of Darkness remains one of cinema's greatest achievements in makeup and prosthetics. Designed by Rob Bottin, the massive horns, blood-red skin, and monstrous features required Curry to sit through 5 to 6 grueling hours of application each day. Bottin and his team meticulously layered foam latex onto Curry's face and body, while enormous extensions were strapped to his shoulders to give him a towering, demonic silhouette. The effect was jaw-dropping. Audiences were stunned by how real and terrifying the character looked. But behind the scenes, it was a test of both endurance and patience for the actor. 5. The makeup nearly drove Curry to quit. As impressive as the final look was, it came at a steep price. The weight of the prosthetics and the restricted movement made every scene a physical challenge. Curry often struggled to breathe properly, and the heat trapped under the latex left him drenched in sweat. At one point, frustrated beyond belief, he tried to peel the makeup off himself, tearing his skin and leaving painful burns that forced him to take time off. For a moment, he considered abandoning the film altogether. Thankfully, he stayed, and his suffering paid off with one of the most iconic villain performances of the 1980s. 6. The unicorns were real animals. 6. The unicorns were real animals. Ridley Scott was determined to make the unicorns feel real, so he avoided puppets and special effects in favor of actual trained horses. To create the illusion, handlers fitted them with carefully designed prosthetic horns, secured in a way that wouldn't injure or irritate the animals. The unicorn's natural grace gave the film a timeless sense of wonder. But working with them wasn't easy. One famously bolted from the set mid-shoot, still wearing its horn, leaving the crew in chaos as they scrambled to recapture the runaway mythical creature. Despite the headaches, the choice added authenticity that still holds up decades later. 7. The set burned to the ground. The breathtaking forest where most of Legend takes place wasn't a real woodland, but a massive, meticulously constructed set inside Pinewood Studios. Built on the famed 007 stage, it allowed for full control over lighting, weather effects, and camera movement. But disaster struck when a fire broke out, consuming the entire forest set in minutes. The production came to a halt as the crew assessed the damage. Ridley Scott had to regroup, rebuilding smaller sets and rethinking key sequences. Many argue that his ability to adapt after such a catastrophic setback was proof of his resilience as a filmmaker. 8. Two different versions of the movie exist. When Legend was finally released, audiences in different countries didn't actually see the same film. Universal Pictures believed American audiences wouldn't sit through a slower, more dreamlike fantasy, so they cut nearly 20 minutes of footage and swapped out the orchestral score for a synth-heavy soundtrack by Tangerine Dream. European audiences, however, got the longer cut with Jerry Goldsmith's sweeping music. The result was two very different versions of the same film, each with its own distinct mood. Fans still debate which cut is superior, though many prefer the director's cut that restores Scott's original vision. 9. Jerry Goldsmith was heartbroken. Jerry Goldsmith, one of Hollywood's most respected composers, had invested months crafting a lush, romantic score for Legend. His music was designed to give the film the grandeur and timeless quality of a dark fairy tale. When he discovered his score had been scrapped for the American release, he was devastated. Critics who heard his version later praised it as one of his finest works. Thankfully, years later, the director's cut restored Goldsmith's score, giving audiences the chance to hear the film as Ridley Scott originally intended. For Goldsmith fans, it's the definitive musical interpretation of the movie. 10. Tangerine Dream saved the film in the U.S. While Goldsmith's heartbreak was real, Tangerine Dream's score gave Legend a unique identity in America. The German electronic group had already built a reputation with atmospheric soundtracks for Sorcerer and Risky Business. Their pulsing synth tones gave the film a surreal, dreamlike quality that appealed to 80s audiences who were already embracing the sound of new wave and electronic music. For some fans, Tangerine Dream's score became inseparable from the film's imagery. Today, both scores have their loyal defenders, proof that Legend managed to inspire not just one, but two completely different musical legacies. 11. It was a box office flop. Despite Ridley Scott's reputation and the incredible design work, Legend struggled when it hit theaters. The darker tone and uneven pacing made it hard for audiences to connect, especially when compared to lighter fantasy films like The Never-Ending Story. Critics were divided. Some admired its daring visuals, while others dismissed it as slow and confusing. With a production budget of around $25 million, the film earned less than half that at the U.S. box office. But while its theatrical run disappointed, the movie slowly built a following on home video and television reruns, proving that sometimes the audience just needs more time. 12. The Darkness costume weighed over 80 pounds. Tim Curry's iconic costume was more than just a visual triumph. It was also a grueling physical challenge. The horns alone weighed several pounds, and when combined with the foam latex bodysuit, the entire outfit tipped the scales at over 80 pounds. Moving, fighting, or even standing for long periods became exhausting for the actor. Crew members often had to help support him between takes so he wouldn't collapse from fatigue. Considering those conditions, it's astonishing that Curry still managed to deliver such a commanding theatrical performance, filled with booming dialogue and fluid movement. 13. Ridley Scott's perfectionism slowed production. Scott's obsessive attention to detail, while part of his genius, also proved to be a double-edged sword. He often spent hours adjusting light beams, fog levels, or tiny set pieces to create the exact atmosphere he wanted. Some crew members joked that they spent entire days just waiting for Ridley to perfect the angle of a single spotlight. While this meticulousness created unforgettable images, like the shafts of golden light piercing through the forest, it also meant production frequently ran behind schedule. The final film may look like a painter's dream, but it was born out of endless patience and precision. 14. Rob Bottin was overworked. Special effects master Rob Bottin, fresh off his groundbreaking work on The Thing, was the man responsible for designing Legend's astonishing creatures. Between darkness, the goblins, fairies, and swamp monsters, Bottin had more work than almost anyone on set. The schedule was so punishing that he often slept in the studio, surviving on caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer determination. His dedication paid off. His designs gave the film its unforgettable otherworldly vibe, but it also left him physically drained. Years later, Bottin admitted that Legend was one of the toughest productions of his career, pushing him to his absolute limits. 15. Tom Cruise disliked the American cut. Tom Cruise rarely speaks out against studio decisions, but in the case of Legend, he made an exception. He openly expressed disappointment with the U.S. version of the film, feeling that the cuts and the replacement score stripped away much of Ridley Scott's intended magic. Cruise believed the director's cut better captured the sense of wonder and myth that he signed on for. When asked years later which version fans should watch, Cruise strongly encouraged them to seek out the restored edition, saying it was the only one that truly reflected the vision of the filmmakers. 16. Mia Sara performed her own dancing scene. One of Legend's most haunting moments is the dance sequence where Princess Lily swirls across the floor with a shadowy figure representing her darker self. While some assumed a double handled the choreography, it was actually Mia Sara performing every move. At just 16 years old, she learned the routine and practiced tirelessly, bringing a sense of eerie elegance to the sequence. Her performance added depth to Lily's character, showing her vulnerability to temptation. For a young actress with little prior experience, pulling off such a complex, symbolic scene was a remarkable achievement. 17. The Goblins' dialogue was improvised. The grotesque goblins, characters like Blix, Pox, and Blunder, gave the movie a mischievous energy. Interestingly, much of their dialogue wasn't even in the script. Ridley Scott encouraged the actors to improvise lines, creating odd, humorous, and sometimes unsettling exchanges on the spot. This freedom gave the goblins a strange unpredictability, making them feel less like scripted villains and more like bizarre, living creatures with their own twisted personalities. Their offbeat humor helped balance the otherwise dark tone of the film, making them some of the most memorable supporting characters. 18. The film's visuals influenced later fantasy. Though Legend wasn't a commercial hit, its influence is easy to trace. Jim Henson's Labyrinth drew inspiration from its combination of childlike wonder and darker undertones. Years later, Guillermo del Toro cited Legend as a major influence on Pan's Labyrinth, especially in its blending of fairy tale whimsy with terrifying Gothic imagery. Even modern fantasy video games, such as The Elder Scrolls, have borrowed from its enchanted forests, menacing demons, and surreal atmosphere. Scott's bold visual style gave fantasy filmmakers and designers permission to embrace beauty and horror side by side. 19. Tim Curry could barely see on set. As if the heavy prosthetics weren't bad enough, the thick makeup and dimly lit sets left Curry nearly blind during filming. His vision was so impaired that he had to memorize his movements and rely on muscle memory just to hit his marks. In fight scenes, this created real risks, as Curry couldn't always see where swords or stunt performers were coming from. Despite the danger, his limited vision gave his performance an eerie, gliding quality that fit the character perfectly. Darkness appeared to move with an unnatural grace, as though he were less human and more otherworldly. 20. A cult classic was born. Despite its rocky journey, Legend has endured as a cult classic, beloved by fantasy fans. Its breathtaking production design, groundbreaking makeup, and Tim Curry's unforgettable performance continue to inspire admiration decades later. While mainstream audiences overlooked it in the 80s, its reputation has only grown, fueled by restored versions, fan screenings, and online discussions. Today, it stands as proof that even flawed films can leave a lasting legacy. What began as a box office disappointment has transformed into one of the most cherished and visually iconic fantasy films of its era. And that wraps up our look at Legend. What started as Ridley Scott's passion project almost collapsed under the weight of fire, prosthetics, and studio meddling, but somehow it emerged as a strange, beautiful, and enduring piece of fantasy cinema. Whether you prefer Jerry Goldsmith's sweeping score or Tangerine Dream's synth-heavy vibe, there's no denying that Legend remains one of the most visually arresting movies of its era. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. If you loved uncovering the secrets behind Legend, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Fade to Fact, and hit the bell so you never miss more behind-the-scenes stories from your favorite classics. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest legends are the ones that almost never made it to the screen.